Let's move to this now. Suspended Deputy National Police Commissioner Shadrack Sibia considered to implementing his own action plan when withdrawing 121 dockets from the KZN Political Killings Task Team. Sibia also admitted that this withdrawal of active dockets possibly had detrimental effects on the cases and could have been handled differently. Being backed into a corner under cross-examination, Sibia also resorted to crying foul and claiming bias in the way he was being questioned. Now, for more analysis on Sibia's testimony, we're joined by security analyst Eldred De Klerk. Mr. De Klerk, good to have you on the program this evening. So it's very interesting that Sibia admitted that, or rather admitted at the Madlanga Commission, that the PKTT was disbanded and 121 case files were moved without any clear review or formal order. Firstly, what's your first reaction to that?
Good evening, Sunshine. Good evening to the viewers. My first reaction is a question, rather, is how did we get to this? And you would think that you have a national commissioner, you have a deputy national commissioner, you have divisional commissioners, and you have a provincial commissioner. They all sign up to a plan that certain things happen. One pulls apparently in his own direction, by his own admission, and he has his own reasons for that. And yet there's no intervention at the time to sort of say, hold on, we agreed, let's do this together. Why are you going in their direction? And that leadership that's required to ensure that the smooth transition does happen. And if anybody is playing contrary to decisions, you correct it. So what does this say about the institutional culture, I believe, and then the leadership and command of the institution, that we have to wait many months to get to a Madlanga Commission where these things are unearthed. And yes, we have the right to question somebody who doesn't pull according to the plan. We still have to get clarity as to his motives for going off script or for doing his own thing. And yes, he could face serious disciplinary or even criminal charges, like obstructing the ends of justice, for example, or defeating the end of justice, or obstructing processes for doing what he did or even sought to do. My question comes back to, how did we get to this? Why no intervention in a timely manner? And which institutions or individuals let us down in the process?
Yeah, but is it unusual for a police unit like the Political Killings Task Team to be shut down without documented review, especially when it's handling sensitive political killings?
No, it isn't. It shouldn't be unusual. There should have been a considered process and a deliberate process for ensuring that the integrity of their investigations is not compromised, that there's a credible chain of evidence, and that investigations, knowledge and understanding of the facts of the matter, or as they emerge, that gets retained. And apparently that was the intention, that the members would move with the dockets. That the team would complement and supplement the capabilities of the murder and robbery or serious and violent crime, wherever the dockets were going to go, and that they would continue to work on the dockets as it is. So that was an honorable intention. Apparently, Sibia's actions sought to disrupt that. We're still not sure why.
Yeah. But what does the delay in investigating these dockets say about operational discipline within the SAPS?
Well, it speaks volume. It should be a matter of concern for us. We know that the South African Police Service has a very low conviction rate, that not all cases worked on is actually prepared for court. And when it does go to court, there are grave errors in the presentation of it, in the submission of documents, in the collection of evidence. And prosecutors are loath to prosecute because they don't see the chance of conviction. So yes, there are grave concerns as to our capabilities and within, and I'm not just talking about the number of people, but it's the skills and the competence of the people involved and how they can effectively present a case for evidence. So we need to be concerned about this, and we need to ask the questions of the right people. Sibia was head of detection. He says he ultimately had that responsibility to ensure that cases are audited and inspected properly. He has a team around him. They, in a provincial level, they also have to make sure. But what can a detective do when we hear that some of them don't just have 100 dockets to deal with, 150 dockets, sometimes 200 dockets, that they are trying to work with a lack of forensic support, with a lack of clear and credible registers like fingerprint registers, ballistic registers, firearm registers. And so when the system around you is found to be wanting and it hampers your ability to do your work, let alone that you've not been properly, because he claims to have the only certification in certain fields of investigation or in a particular cause of being trained as a detective, and that nobody else in SAPS has this. That is alarming if that is in fact so, because the South African Police Service is part of Interpol, they're part of the Africa police associations, and they should be learning from each other, and there's technology that can assist them. So it's an institutional failure if detectives are struggling, when they are not properly resourced and are capacitated for their work or trained, and they're not properly supervised. So we need to look to the leadership and command of these young men and women, or not so young men and women, who may be working diligently without the proper infrastructure and policing resources to be able to do their work effectively.
Eldred, also interesting is that Sibia says he feels he's being punished for being effective. Does that ring true to you, or is something else going on here from what we're picking up?
It could be true. It depends on how you define it, because his success should be the success of the institution, right? I mean, if part of our team is doing well, it draws the whole team, and the whole team can share in the accolade. So if he says that he's been punished for being effective, is he effectively saying that I'm casting shade, or I'm actually calling into question the effectiveness of others, and therefore I'm a victim? Or is he saying that I am in being effective is not only showing up the others who are not being effective, but I'm also pointing towards not just their incompetence or their negligence, but possibly, and this is what he hints at them lying and covering up their incompetence or their lack of effectiveness, and that they in fact could be corrupt and are dragging me into that whole, the accusations of corruption and counter accusations. So it's multi-layered, and it shouldn't be happening, but we do know that for a dysfunctional institution that is imploding, and it has been imploding for a while, that it hasn't had the necessary oversight and monitoring as it should be, and it hasn't been governed properly. We understand that this factionalism, this fragmentation is a large part of an ailing institution, unfortunately.
Yeah, but when leadership decisions aren't backed by clear documentation, what kind of problems can that cause, especially for police investigations?
Well, absolutely, because we can't review, we can't see who made what decision with who else in the room. And we saw that with Marikana, we saw that with Zondo. Decisions were made, and apparently minutes of meetings just disappeared. Nobody knew where they were. So we have other examples in recent time of documentation not being present. So you can't review those decisions. You can't justify this. You can't understand the evidence on which the suppositions and the reasoning and the evidence on which these decisions were based. So it calls into question the evidence, even though, sorry, not the evidence, but the actual decision making or the actual path of an investigation, even though it may be proved to be correct in time, the lack of proper diligent and credible documentation means that we can't review, we can't monitor, and we can't substantiate in over a course of time.
Yeah. Now, some say that the unit's closure might affect public confidence, especially in the SAPS. Do you agree with such a sentiment, and why?
Well, I don't. I need to ask how the closing of a task team, one task team, who was set up for a very specific purpose, and some would say that political killings have actually nosedived. We still are not clear as to, in total, how many cases the PKTT were worked on, what successes they had. We still don't have those numbers. We know they claim to have been successful. We still cannot see the timelines and the aggregated numbers over time, let alone their expenditure. That's another question. The plan was, and this is agreed to by the SAP senior leadership, that we resource a unit that functions within the structure, that has a dedicated budget, that will have a dedicated line of responsibility and resourcing and authority, and that is called the murder and robbery and serious violent crime. Those units have been re-established due to political pressure from some political parties, and in fact, from some community members saying you need a dedicated capability to deal with this. We need to understand that political killings or any other motive-led killing is not it's a useful classification, but it still remains a murder. It tells us maybe something about the reasons why somebody was targeted and the risk that it was involved, or the arena in which the elements of investigating it in a particular way remains the same. Motive doesn't define a particular crime. And I can say that, almost with a sense of contradiction or irony, because here we're talking about political killings, right, and we have defined it as such, even though motives is not the essence of investigating something. So we do now know that plan to move it was because there was a recognition that you can't just do this on an ad hoc basis, that it needs to be institutionalized. And in fact, that's what General Khumalo was saying. You can close the unit, bear in mind how the unit worked, the successes they had, their modus operandi, and let's adopt their methods. Let's make sure that we work in a similar vein across jurisdictions, across divisions, and across departments. Let's draw in intelligence, judiciary, analyst, and others to ensure that we have a much more team-led approach to investigations, that we draw in the competencies and skills and understanding and resources of these departments, and that we prepare cases that are credible, that can ultimately lead to conviction. That's Khumalo's plea, not for the PKTT to continue. His plea is, I instituted certain things, and he may be wrong. I think there's other examples of in SAPS and elsewhere where this kind of modus operandi has already worked, and this method of working is well established. But let's give him his credit. Let's say kudos to you, and you want this to continue. Let's support that contention.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that our SAPS steps into the 21st century, that they get to learn that they get the appropriate use of technology, that they get the work environment that they need, and they are supported by the leadership in command that can resource them, that can give them the necessary budget, and will back their intentions for effective policing. That is what we need. We cannot hang on to a sacred cow like a PKTT, for example, or make it into a sacred cow by saying that's the only way to deal with political killings. It isn't.
Yeah. Eldred, as we get to the end of our conversation, I have to ask you this. If these dockets were linked to politically sensitive cases, what are the broader implications for justice and accountability as well?
Well, first and foremost, I think you're asking a pertinent question that we're all sitting with. Firstly, that this is political. It tells us something about the state of our body politic in the country. It tells us about whether can there be a free contestation of ideas, and can somebody freely represent themselves for public office, and once they do that, are they at risk of being assassinated? If I'm effective in public office, do I stand the risk of exposing others and their corruption and complicity, and does that make me a target? So it raises all kinds of questions about our body politic. We also know that in that arena, given how political it is, and they're working with sensitive information, that these officers, and by their own admission, couldn't always draw on the resources or the proximity of local police stations, for example, lest things get leaked, and that they may get political or pressure from certain other quarters, be political or otherwise. The other sad part of this is that we're also hearing that while these investigations are sensitive, and they normally drag out and take quite a while, because we really do have to work diligently and to ensure that there's a credible chain of evidence, and that we can get a conviction based on credible evidence and testimony, that they haven't always kept the families and the loved ones and significant others abreast of where they are. That they haven't always communicated not just where we're at or what we're doing. What they're doing is not important, but that they haven't really reassured these families on a routine and a regular basis that we're working on it. We haven't forgotten about you. We are on it. It takes time, and this is why it's taking time. So there's a whole layered response to your rather simple question, and there's multiple constituencies that has to be accounted for and also has to be dealt with as we seek to answer your question.
Eldred De Klerk, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. We